Right, our next speaker is another former soldier. He is someone who embodies the reason why I refuse to dignify them with any other name, not soldiers, but the lying harlot media. Those people in the formerly honourable profession of journalism. And I don't say that to be explicitly provocative, but to be very technically accurate. Because so many journalists are just professional liars. The truth may be coincidentally in their story, but it's not intentionally there. It's a narrative. And that's why I call them the harlot, is because they are commercially unfaithful to the integrity and virtue that they have a contract with us for. And they do it for profit. The lying harlot media. There is probably no topic misrepresented more than the topic of Israel. For the record, I am a defiant Zionist. And it's important to define terms that are frequently distorted, manipulated, and lied about. I believe Australia has a right to sovereignty and security without the approval of anybody else in the world. I do not believe Australia is beyond criticism. I hold the same standard for Israel, and that makes me a Zionist. If you're not a Zionist, you are in furious agreement with radical Islam, radical leftism, and radical globalism. And if you're comfortable with that, I'd ask you, is there any other topic in which you can find furious agreement with Islamists, globalists, and leftists? Any topic that's debatable. We should breathe air. Vegetables are good for you. There's probably not much else. And so if you're on the same page as them regarding the topic of Israel, get ready for some information. Our next speaker was a soldier who served on the border of Gaza immediately after Israel withdrew completely. And I won't steal any more of his story because that's what I want him to share with you in his own words. But at the end of his short speech, we're going to take questions. Feel free to ask the hard ones. I will be filtering them. You won't get the microphone. But we're going to put a slide up, as we had yesterday. You need to download the application on your smartphone, WhatsApp, and then you can add Church and State as a contact. Don't bother calling it or texting it, it won't work. But if you send us a message via WhatsApp, I'll be able to see which questions are the most common, aggregate them, and get the most pertinent questions addressed by our next speaker before the end of his speech. Would you please welcome to the stage one of our major sponsors for this conference. In fact, he's donated 100 copies of his book to the conference, so 100% of the profits are going to support this ongoing ministry around Australia and the internet. So doing that will be very good. Get to your feet, come on up. Please welcome to the stage Avi Yemini.
He's taken half my speech. Good morning. It's bright and early for a Saturday. Usually I'm recovering from Shabbat dinner. Shabbat shalom to the other, I'm assuming there's probably a couple of naughty Jews in this crowd. Yeah, there was one. So when my good friend Dave Pello asked me to speak at this year's Church and State, I admit I was honoured. But I was a little bit nervous because I was thinking, what could this Orthodox turned secular Jew offer a Christian summit? So I asked David, who, by the way, Dave, I think he's doing a fantastic job. Put your hands together for Dave. I asked him, what's the brief? What exactly do you want me to talk about? And I was expecting him to say something inspiring, enlightening, godly. something, to be frank, that I probably struggle a little bit with. But thank God himself, Dave, without hesitating, he answered, the lying harlot media. Now, there's something this particular Jew can offer a room of God-fearing Christians. Because there are three things that I think the media hate the most. The truth. People like you who put their faith before their lies and won't fall for their nonsense. And people like me who may not be as God-fearing as you, but we are able to call out their lies and bring more people to that fold. So we're in great company. We're in this together, as they like to say, in the fight for truth. Now, of course, 25 minutes is not very long, which was the specific time that Dave, about, I reckon, 30 times said to me, it's capped at 25 minutes. I'm not sure where he gets the impression that putting a mic in my hand is a dangerous game and it may not end very well, but what could possibly go wrong there? But so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a quick talk and then I'll open the floor to hecklers, questions. I don't know why Dave ruined it. I felt the disappointment in the room when he said he's going to filter those questions. Dave, can I be in charge of the filtering? Anyways, 25 minutes is the limit, so we'll have a chat about the harlotry of the mainstream media. And even on that subject, I said to Dave when he told me the harlotry of the mainstream media, I said, can you be a bit more specific? Because even 25 minutes on that is not very long. And I'll read what his words were exactly. Explain to the audience why they shouldn't trust the mainstream media about anything to do with the Israel-Hamas war. Where do I start? Firstly, is there anyone in this crowd that believes the mainstream media about anything? Put your hand out. Oh, there we go. We've got someone. About Avi Yemini. But, I think most people don't anymore. But what many people don't realize is even if they're getting their information sometimes these days off platforms like, TikTok or Facebook or whatever, it's often come through the mainstream media. So whoever they're following, especially when it comes to the subject of Israel and Hamas or the Middle East conflict, it's usually started at the mainstream media. And you think you might be getting something edgy. Everybody does. And this isn't something new. We've seen this explode since October 7. But the truth is, this issue of the distortion of the facts, of the truth of the Middle East conflict is what got me into what I do today. So I have a long story, and you can read it all by buying one of the books that 100% of the proceeds, like I said, will help support the church and state. So you can read the entire book with the story from the start. But when I got back from Israel in 2009, I opened gyms called IDF Training. And they were Krav Maga and 24-hour gyms. And the thing is, I was not a very political person. I wouldn't have been able to tell you the difference between Liberal and Labor, and the truth is, I still can't, but a lot has happened since then. And I remember it was about 10 years ago, something like that, and I remember sitting down in front of the TV when I got home from a long day of work, and it was through one of the Gaza operations, and I sat in front of the TV, turned on ABC just to see the latest from what was happening, and I couldn't believe my eyes because, as Dave mentioned, most of my service, I was deployed. So in the beginning of my service, I was in the Lebanon war, but I was very junior there, and most of my active duty was in actually Kfar Aza, which is one of the kibbutzim that got decimated in October 7. That's where I was stationed on the border and doing missions in and out of Gaza. I knew that place really well. And when I turned on the TV, I just couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't believe how they were distorting what was happening in that particular mission, because I knew exactly what they had done. I could see how they manipulated the story to suit their narrative. And I guess it was my first introduction to fake news. It was where I realized, holy crap, if we're being lied about on this particular thing, then why would I trust them to tell me the weather? And in Melbourne, a lot of people can resonate. We haven't trusted them about the weather for a long time, but it made me question everything. And to cut a long story short, it was where I found my voice. I started to use our platform at the gyms, which were quite popular because I know, surprise, surprise, there was one thing I've always been good at, and that's been getting attention. I'm the middle child of 17 kids, so I'm enjoying every moment of this. Can we extend it to 30 minutes a day? And so I used at the time our Facebook pages that were massive for two small gyms. They were very big, and I started to voice my view on the conflict from my experience, having served only a couple years earlier in that exact place. And I got all the feedback, people who loved or despised our gym, some members, some not, telling us, having everybody's an expert on Israel when it comes to any conflict. And at the time, people were telling me, oh, well, you shouldn't use your business or whatever. And I thought, you're training at IDF training. Krav Maga is the Israeli Army's self-defense system. If you don't like us defending Israel's right to exist, then you can probably go do, I don't know, jiu-jitsu or something else. That's fine. But then after that had happened and the conflict, that round of fighting ended, I kind of found my voice. And like I said, I wasn't very political. I just approached things from a common sense point of view, which I found out quite quickly was a far right position on politics. And so I started kind of voicing my sensible opinion on all sorts of social and political issues, and people did say, well, maybe don't use your business there, and fair enough. So I opened a Facebook page at the time, and I told anyone that's interested in my views, you can join there. And that was the beginning of my journey, I guess, to where I am today at Rebel News. Like I said, you can read that whole book, including all my war stories, in the book that Dave has out the front end. I can even sign a few if you want to give me more attention at the end. But I want to bring it back, before we bring it to questions, I want to bring it back to the current conflict, because like I said, it seems like since October 7, more than any time in life, and I think the reason any time in my life everybody's an expert on it, I think that's probably got to do with social media, which has got its great, it's great pros to it in the fact that everybody can be a citizen journalist, but it also has its cons where everybody has an opinion, and it doesn't matter how stupid some of the opinions are, they can be amplified quite quickly. And since October 7, as soon as the horrific attack the terrorist attack on Israel happened, we saw this thing. I don't know if you'll remember. I guess anybody that has any kind of close sensitivity to this issue, you'll know on October 7, October 8, and probably October 9, the world was sympathetic to Israel. There's no question about that. I was shocked. I was shocked that even people who I'd never thought would be were. And looking back, I guess it was that we saw Hamas's own footage that they gloated, that they live streamed, that they put online. In fact, they took their victims' phones, logged into their Facebook pages, and live streamed their own brutality on their own Facebook pages. So at the time, there was no question about what had happened. So any decent human basically stood up and go, wow, this is horrific. To see this happen to any human being, doesn't matter where you sit on any issue, it is heartbreaking. But I knew when I saw that surely that's not going to last long. To most, if it happened to any other country, you'd have at least 6 months to a year of sympathy. But Israel, I gave it, weeks, if not days. And I decided then, I remember I was talking to my boss, Ezra, and I said, we were deciding whether I should go or not. And one part of me was looking at going, no, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Even the mainstream media looked like they were actually reporting the truth for once. They weren't trying to paint Islamic terrorists as the victims. Is there really a reason for me to go? And I remember talking to Ezra and saying, there's no way. I reckon by the time I land, the narrative is going to shift. And I think I arrived, so it was October 7th, I think I arrived in Israel October 9 or October 10, their time. And by the time I land, the narrative was already shifting. And I knew I did the right thing by traveling. And just to give you one example of my experience in that time, that really demonstrates the reason why the mainstream media, as Dave likes to call them, the harlot mainstream media, why, what's everything that's wrong with them. So I don't know if you guys remember, on October 17, there was news, and I was there on the border at the time. There was a story that broke. Israel bombed a hospital, 500 dead. The headline, it started with Al Jazeera, of course, a terrorist network. I'm not just saying that. We're talking about Al Jazeera, funded by Qatar, which funds Hamas. It's, yes, they're also aired, I think, on ABC or SBS, but so you draw your own conclusions there. I'm not saying they're terrorists too. I'm not. But if your best friend is a terrorist, and that story, it spread like wildfire. Every mainstream network ran it. Channel 9, 10, 7 here. Everyone around the world was running it. And every clout-chasing influencer who realized the easiest way, and I'll be honest, as an attention seeker, this was a conflict for me internally. The amount of attention you could get for bashing Israel or staying on the issue and the truth, it was tempting. I know I love my family in Israel, but I do love them more than attention, it turns out. But everybody jumped on this story. And at the time in Israel, you've got to remember that the state was in shock. It was literally 10 days after the brutal Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel. In fact, when I got there was no one on the streets. There was literally no one on the streets. It was the first time, and I served in war in Israel, and the country was scared. People didn't know. In fact, there was no one would go out on the streets out of fear. And we were traveling one night. I'm probably going to go over the 25 minutes. Sorry, mate. But there was no one on the streets, and we were just trying to get as close to the border as we could get. That we were driving down this road that goes to Gaza, and we're thinking it got really dark, and we're thinking there was no lights, nothing, and we're thinking, holy crap, we are getting hundreds of meters away, and nobody's stopping us. at the time, this is why people were so scared, is they were literally catching terrorists out in those same fields daily. In fact, not even just in the fields. In Beersheba, the day before I'm talking about, they found terrorists in an apartment that had come over the border. So Israel was in a state of fear. In that story, we kept driving, and I was kind of hoping somebody stops me, but then I also kind of wanted to see what would happen. Don't tell my wife. And suddenly, out of the pitch black, there was, floodlights on us and guns drawn. And again, as somebody who served in Israel's army, that would never happen on Israeli territory ever. You would never have the Israeli military so anxious that they would draw their guns immediately and scream, not from Hamas's side, but from driving from Israel. And they were screaming at us to turn their headlights off. It was a bloody Tesla. I don't know how to turn the headlights off. At the time, Elon Musk was giving free electricity, free power to the cars, and I jumped on it, didn't realize it was going to almost get me killed. Thanks, Elon. But at the end, it ended up all right, and they just turned us around and told us probably not to drive into Gaza. But it was a country on edge, and that story that spread like wildfire, started by the mainstream media, spread by every influencer on the internet that wants some clout. Then what happened in the weeks following and at the time, every Israeli I was talking to, everyone was like, it wasn't even a question of, is it possible we accidentally hit that hospital? It was like, this is complete nonsense. And Israelis are a population that are happy to speak out about the government, including myself. During COVID, I was the first to condemn many Israeli policies. But everybody at the time was just like, there's no chance that is true. And after all the international investigations, it turned out Islamic Jihad, it's not Hamas's fault, it was a different terrorist group. They misfired into a parking lot as part of the hospital that killed and injured, I think, 80 to 100 people. It's a very different story. And guess what? Many of you may not have heard the ending, may not have heard about how the mainstream media, who acts like they're so great and they're, that they've got such integrity in the... I didn't realize there was a countdown time. I better hurry up. The mainstream media has such integrity that they walked back their story and they corrected the record. But guess what? The damage was done. And still to today, I talk to people and they absolutely believe the story that Israel went in the first days to bomb the hospital, even though when I ask them, can you explain to me what the benefit for Israel to bomb a hospital of civilians would be? Avi, you're part of the WEF. That's the answer you get, that somehow the globalists wanted Israel to get away with bombing the hospital. The same globalists that put more resolutions against the state of Israel than any other nation on the planet. I think I ran out of time there, so I think we'll open to the hecklers, and we've got 6 minutes and 11 seconds, so I'm saved by the clock.
So that's about 10 questions. All right, first question is, first in, best dressed and unfiltered. Why did you not go harder after the obvious corruption that let the massacre happen that started the recent war in Israel?
It's a good question. And the thing is, in Israel, I asked that a lot. In fact, that was my first question to anyone in a position of power. What the hell happened? And I tell you as somebody that my job, in fact, if I was there on October 7, it was my unit that was slaughtered. It was in my base, in the bedroom that I would have slept in. They got butchered. And I know more than anyone that it is so hard to penetrate that border. I was there, like Dave said, right after the disengagement, so the months after, and Hamas had taken over. They threw all their other Palestinians off the top of the buildings, including the Queers for Palestine, sorry to break it to you. And I knew that my job as a marksman was, if somebody came within the 200-meter buffer zone was to fire the warning shots, and then if they, work out who they are, and then if they were still... That was my job. So I know how difficult it was. The thing is, everybody's asking that question. One is people go, yeah, we want that answered. But first, we need to win the war to even have to even get the answer, because it doesn't matter if we lose. Because if there is no Israel at the end of it, what does it matter whose fault it was? Everybody in Israel wants to hold those people accountable. My personal opinion, from the fact that, speaking to soldiers there that were serving on that border before, I think there was a massive intelligence failure, military failure. I think that they didn't look at Gaza as the threat that they really were anymore. In fact, every soldier was telling me the worst deployment line at the time before October 7 for a soldier wants an active deployment line, because otherwise it's a lot of just standing around, was Gaza, because it was so boring. There was nothing. In my time, it wasn't like that. In my time, we were going in every night trying to track the people firing the rockets and all that type of stuff. But yes, that is a valid question, and questioning that is fine, as long as you can at the same time stand for Israel's right to defend herself. So if you're going to use that question to justify why Israel should be allowed to be slaughtered and why Israelis should be sacrificed, then you're not asking it in good faith. If you're asking it in good faith, I am asking that alongside you.
Good. Do you know, and are you familiar with the content of Emir Tsafati? No? That's a no. That means you don't know if his content's reliable. Well, I like him, but I haven't been in Gaza.
What's the platform? What's the...
Oh, he's on Telegram, and he shares a lot of intelligence from Israel. But I would recommend him. Look him up on Telegram, Emir Tsafati.
If Dave recommends him, I reckon he's all right.
Yeah. He's quite credible. So is Dave. What other resources for information about events in politics in Israel would you recommend or trust?
I don't think Israel is so different to anyone. I think trust your gut and your ability to critically think. I'm not saying every Israel advocate doesn't inflate their version of a particular event. That's just human nature. But I think you should look at everything that's going on and every story. In fact, if you're on Twitter, you could see the same video with two separate captions, one from the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, and the other side, the pro-Israel side, and they will portray the same thing in a completely different way. I think you should look at both, and I think if you have a critical mind, you will come to the right conclusion, because the truth is the truth. And the video speaks for itself, and you can hear the way each side is portraying it, and you're the best person to judge it. Don't rely on the media to break it down for you, because they have an agenda too.
I'll help answer that question. That there is recommended reading for every section in this book. And I actually didn't get a recommendation from Avi, but this comes from one of the other leading Israel advocates from AJAC in Australia, and I'm most of the way through listening to this now, and I find it excellent. That's Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth by Noah Tishby. Noah Tishby is a leftist feminist, not devoted to a theologically accurate interpretation of either doctrine or Israel, but she gives a really good overview of the history in very layman's terms. So I would recommend that, and I'd recommend it to people who are critics. It just gives a good apologetic for Israel's right to exist, as well as the history and the context, which is so often glossed over in Israel.
On that, in fact, that's something I've found since October 7. I found that I'm going to sources and listening to commentators a lot more in the centre, both the right and the left, because the two fringes have lost the plot a little bit. The left lost the plot years ago, but even on the right, and then you obviously have the Islamists, and they between the three of them, they have the numbers. So sometimes when you're on the internet, you feel like you're one rational voice amongst them all. But what I'm finding myself lately doing is listening to people like, not she's great, that I disagree with on probably political and social issues on everything else, but then listening to their, and actually it's opening me up to listening. So there's another one that I think is really good, completely different style, and is not Jewish, is this streamer called Destiny. And he's a left-wing streamer, but he debates everybody on Israel, and he comes at it from a really rational perspective and makes really good arguments. I don't agree with all his arguments even on Israel, but I think if you want to understand what the other side, what the pro-Hamas are often doing, and they come on to, like, he gets people on his shows that I would never be allowed to have, because I'll never come on because he's from their side, technically. And the discussions and the information you can get out of those really. So as a YouTuber, look up Destiny. I cannot believe, if you asked me before October 7 that I would be recommending Destiny, I would be. Don't listen to him about anything else. Don't listen to him about Trump and Biden. That's all I can say.
Where can people find you on social platforms?
So if you go to followavi.com, you can see all my socials there. But these days, I guess Twitter is probably one of the better ones, because we're free to talk, and that includes letting the other side speak. So if you're not on Twitter, I think that's probably one of the safest platforms today.
Yeah, it is.
X.
I still call it Twitter. I'm stubborn. Are you expecting Hezbollah to be increasingly attacking in the north anytime soon? If yes, are the IDF ready?
It's a good question. I remember when we were in Israel covering the war in the south, so we didn't know, as journalists, you don't know, that it's all unfolding. Nobody really knows what's about to happen. And I get a call from my friend while we're on the southern border, and he says to me, a friend from the army, he goes, "Hey, I'm head of security in," I forgot what it's called. It's the most northern Moshav, so it's on the border. God, it's breaking. No, above Kiryat Shmona. Anyway, so he calls me, he goes, "Hey, I'm head of security now of this Moshav. I think something's, like, it's about to get real. You should come here and I could get you in." And I go, "Oh, sweet, yeah, we'll come there and cover what happens." I get about an hour and a half in. I interviewed, what's her name from she's what's her name? I'm forgetting everything's names now. Anyways, and the bloody Tesla, because we didn't know which roads are locked, so we had to drive 2 hours back to go 2 hours forward. By the time we got there, It had already been locked down. And a bunch of people in that moshav were killed by anti-tank missiles. And he calls me, he goes, "No, you can't come." I go, "What do you mean I can't come?" And I'm like, "That's cool. Don't tell my wife." We just drove there anyways. And we got to the gate, and he wasn't able to come to us because it was all happening, but somebody else came in, and on one of the videos that we covered at the time, was giving us gave us an interview on that gate. But at that time, to answer the question, everybody was sure Lebanon was opening up, because also historically, if you look at, like, all the conflicts, even when I was there in 2005, 2006, that conflict started with Gaza, then it opened up in the north. That's generally how it happened, and at the time, everybody thought the north was going to open. Now, if they haven't done it by now, I feel like Iran's not really up for it. Is Israel prepared? Hezbollah is not Hamas. Hezbollah has a lot more firepower. But will Israel win if they are drawn into a war in the north? They have to.
That's right. Yeah. Final question, and I might help you with this, and then you can add something on as briefly as Avi can manage.
I did pretty well, man.
Yeah, okay.
I even didn't put an ending to. I realized, like reading my notes, there was no ending. I assumed Dave was going to cut me off.
Lunch is going to be just a little bit shorter. How do we answer our fellow Christians who think differently to us and subscribe to the belief that those in Israel now are not the original Israelites and that Zionists are different to Israelites? I've even heard the argument that the blessing of Israel, that is its prosperity, since 1948, is actually because Hitler financed aqueducts. I haven't heard that one. Where can we read reliable modern history to discern the truth around such matters? With the...
Why modern history? What about the Old Testament?
Oh yeah, all of history.
I'm not religious myself, but I reckon that's a good history book.
I'm religious. It is biblical for Jews in exile to intermarry with the local population. Jeremiah 29:11, you know, where God, that verse we claim for ourselves, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a future and a hope. That was to the Jews in exile. In that same chapter, it says, seek the peace of the city where you dwell. Give your sons to the daughters of that city. Give your daughters to the sons. Let them have children and intermarry. Plant gardens and settle in and become part of that nation. That's what God said to do. Why would you be surprised that after 2,000 years of God scattering the Jews, that they intermarried with the locals and became incredibly like that culture where they were? It's very biblical. So I think it's a really, really weak theological argument. And the genetic evidence for tracing ancestry back to Judah is incredibly strong. A very good source who goes into the forensic details of that, seeing critical reports that sort of say, oh, Ashkenazi Jews aren't real, is Dr. Michael Brown. Look for, if you want to search on his YouTube channel, Dr. Michael Brown, Ashkenazi Jews, DNA, you'll come up with a really good video that refutes that biased argument. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so quickly, like I think there's so many flaws in that, and often those arguments are made in bad faith. They're not. They're not real, right? The whole argument of Ashkenazi to like I'm half. I'm Yemen and Russian Polish. I've got both. My Yemen family are certainly not Ashkenazi, and the majority of Israel isn't Ashkenazi. But what I would say for Christians that are fighting Israel, I would say, go live in Gaza. You remind me of the queers for Palestine. Like, you guys, you know what? Don't even go to Gaza. I get it. Gaza's a horrible place. The Zionists are bombing it. Go live anywhere else in the Middle East. Heck, go live in Bethlehem. Go live in Bethlehem. In 1948, Bethlehem, I think, was 80% Christian. Today, it's about 11. And that's the same across the Middle East, except for one tiny dot. Those bloody Zionists. They're the only ones, by a small percentage, that the Christian population has grown since 1948. So if you're a Christian calling for the demise of the Zionist enterprise, you're essentially calling to wipe out Christians from the Middle East.
Yep. Yeah, totally. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Avi Yemini.
And before I go, I just want to say thanks to Dave, and we'll do a win-win. Go buy my book at the back. That way I get more attention, and all the money's going to help fund this. It's a really well-written book by someone that couldn't pass year 8.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.